This is Tinian, a sparsely populated island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, hundreds of miles away from the nearest mainland. It's known for its untouched beaches, cattle ranches, and the hot peppers that grow all over the island. Besides that, Tinian is literally dotted with historical sites that attract tourists interested in World War II. But it's to this far-off and, on the surface, not-so-special island that the U.S. granted $800 million. A tremendous amount. And it's been allocated for a very clear purpose. Since January 2024, military personnel began clearing away many acres of jungle so that construction work could begin. They were planning to build an airstrip on Tinian, but what was uncovered beneath the trees wasn't bare earth or grass. The jungle had hidden old, forgotten runways. Why were they abandoned? Where did they come from? And what made this find so shocking? You can't figure this out without coffee. Just an unobtrusive reminder to do something under the video. And thanks to those, you know what for. First off, I should probably say a few words about the island itself. Tinian is located to the east of the Philippines and south of Japan, and is part of the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. This Commonwealth is governed by the United States, although it's not part of any state. Tinian's area is about 39 square miles. For comparison, the Los Alamos National Laboratory is almost the same size, covering about 35 square miles, while Yellowstone National Park is roughly 100 times larger at 3,500 square miles. Most of Tinian Island is pretty flat, with its highest point being 561 feet, which makes it perfect for an airstrip. Thanks to its proximity to Japan, it was Tinian that was chosen as the base for the U.S. atomic attack in February 1945. The island became the starting point for the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's not the kind of fact anyone would want to add to their resume. However, that being said, Tinian is located about 1,500 miles south of Tokyo. A round-trip flight there took an average of 12 hours for the Boeing B-29, and this proximity to Japan was one of the reasons Tinian served as the headquarters for the 509th Composite Group. From here, American bombers would head out on combat missions during World War II to the Philippines, Okinawa, and mainland Japan. Today, it's known that bomber groups from Tinian were involved in destructive raids on Tokyo with incendiary bombs. But how did the U.S. even know about this island? I started looking up information and found out that Tinian actually has a pretty long history. The first settlers arrived here around 1500 BC from what's now the Philippines. Then there was another migration, and then another. In general, thousands of years ago, the island was already inhabited by people who built stone structures all over Tinian. The lata. It's a column with a stone half-sphere on top, in case you're wondering. Up until the 15th century, no one in Europe knew about Tinian, but by the end of the 1600s, it had become a Spanish territory and a supply hub for Spanish, English, Dutch, and French ships. They would stop here to restock their provisions and water. Of course, the island's native population was greatly diminished due to diseases brought over and clashes with the Europeans. Then, Tinian was sold by Spain to the German Empire in 1899. But during this period, there were no efforts to develop or settle the island. It was still under the control of Spanish landowners. In 1914, during World War I, the island was captured by Japan, which used it to grow sugarcane, coffee, and cotton. It seems that Tinian was also used for military purposes, but up until the end of World War II, the Japanese hadn't stationed their garrisons there, and when they finally did, it was already too late. The island was captured during the Battle of Tinian from July 24th to August 1st, 1944. The capture of Tinian came after the invasion of Saipan, which is also part of the Mariana Islands. The Battle of Saipan lasted from June 15th to July 9th, 1944, and was one of the major campaigns of World War II. The invasion of Tinian took less time, but was still tough and bloody. Over 300 Americans and 6,000 Japanese were killed during the fighting. Nevertheless, the Navy construction battalions, known as the CBs, started clearing and expanding the area just a few days after the island was taken. 6 runways were built in 2 months, and soon Tinian became the largest air base in the world. Witnesses were amazed. Nearly 6,200 miles from San Francisco, the United States military built the largest airport in the world. Of course, they had to work hard. A huge coral ridge was partially leveled to fill the uneven surface and build 6 runways. Each one was an impressive 10-lane highway and over 2 miles long. Not dozens, but hundreds of military planes were based there. Witnesses said the island looked like a giant aircraft carrier. There were other construction projects, including barracks, an administration building, oil storage tanks, weapon depots, an air-conditioned building for bomb assembly, and special pits for loading bombs onto planes. But the Second World War ended and hundreds of planes returned to the mainland. Then, in the 1980s, Marine Corps exercises were held on the island, and military presence remains there to this day. However, all the runways, except one, fell into disrepair. This one runway became part of the Tinian International Airport. But the rest? They were simply swallowed up by the overgrown jungle. And instead of many soldiers, tourists now come here. As for the locals, they just live their lives. They raise livestock, fish, welcome tourists. But there are way fewer soldiers here than before. At least that's how it used to be. At the beginning of 2024, the military was given an order to clear the jungle and find overgrown strips. There was a lot of work, but they did it quickly, and sometimes it happened that in just one day they cleared areas the size of several American football fields. And this is despite the fact that they had to work in the heat, high humidity, basically the jungle. The task was pretty straightforward. Go into the jungle using coordinates found with GPS and mark the points. This way, the boundaries of the old runways were defined. All in all, it took about 60 days to discover these runways, and the military themselves consider this really fast. Given the jungle and other conditions, it's hard to disagree with them. Overall, they had to discover and restore over 0.7 square miles of destroyed surface from World War II. And all of this was financed with that $800 million. The overall modernization plan of the U.S. military includes the construction of a new airfield on a Pacific territory. That's why the island is undergoing a massive reconstruction of an abandoned airfield and other military upgrades, all to allow the U.S. to, quote, rapidly deploy and sustain forces in diverse environments. This is taking place amid worries about China's recent missile tests. Meanwhile, it's all part of a larger strategy by Washington to strengthen its security presence in the Indo-Pacific region with global tensions on the rise. This Indo-Pacific plan was, by the way, released in 2022 and has been progressively put into action since then. In 2022, the work began, and the first phase of the project, which includes the upgraded runway, is set to finish in 2025. In addition to the $384 million airport restoration project, the Ministry of Defense also signed a $409 million contract for operations and training developments, including equipment, facilities, and other related projects to support the military on the island. One could say that the situation on the island is rolling back to the post-war years. Well, maybe not quite. They're not just planning to build bases here, they're also going to create a military training complex that'll include several ranges, landing zones, and base camps. All of this is to give soldiers realistic joint combat training in tropical conditions. Plus, the Army's looking into ways to improve the waterfront and docks at Tinian Port to accommodate various Navy vessels. Although all this modernization started back in 2022, the main reason, or maybe the catalyst, was the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile into the Pacific Ocean. China announced this launch in September 2024. It's believed that this was the first such test since the early 1980s. But it's not even about the fact that there haven't been such tests in a while. It's just that the missile launch, which according to the Ministry of Defense carried a training warhead, took place right when there was increasing international focus on China's nuclear stockpile. Of course, everyone got tense. The Chinese Ministry of Defense stated that the launch was part of a routine arrangement in the annual training plan, and the missile fell into expected sea areas. The ministry didn't provide any further details other than confirming that the launch wasn't aimed at any specific country or target. It was just a training launch, plain and simple. Analysts claim that the missiles were likely fired from Hainan Island or somewhere nearby and landed somewhere near French Polynesia. It might not have worried the global community so much if China weren't leading in the rapid expansion of its nuclear arsenal. Originally, according to U.S. Defense Department intelligence, Beijing had about 200 warheads in 2020, and by the end of the decade, that number was expected to double at least. Since then, the numbers have changed slightly. Now, as stated by the intelligence agency, China already has 500 of these weapons and is expected to have over 1,000 by 2030. most of which will be capable of reaching the U.S. Among this arsenal, for example, there's the DF-26 medium-range ballistic missile. Chinese sources claim that the DF-26 has a range of over 3,100 miles, and it's the first Chinese ballistic missile with conventional warheads capable of reaching Guam and the American military facilities located there. Guam is home to two major U.S. military bases, the Naval Base Guam in Santa Rita and Anderson Air Force Base in Yigo, as well as the Guam National Guard. Guam itself is the most western U.S. territory in the Pacific region. Tinian Island's about 100 miles north of Guam, so it's pretty close. Meanwhile, China's quickly improving its capability to strike thousands of miles from its shores. According to a top-secret intelligence report that somehow got into the public domain due to a leak of Pentagon documents. Anyway, according to it, China successfully tested a new medium-range hypersonic ballistic missile called the DF-27. I've talked about the DF-26, but this weapon is a more advanced version. In addition to its increased range, the new missile has the ability to hypersonic glide, meaning it can maneuver to avoid missile defense systems. Potentially, it's a more successful carrier killer than its predecessors. In light of this, the question even came up about how to protect Guam from Chinese rockets, let alone the need to adapt large U.S. military bases to a potential attack. Given that potential adversaries of the U.S. today possess precision weapons capable of breaking through even fortified bases and structures, it's not worth investing in strengthening U.S. forces and weaponry in the Pacific. Instead of trying to make facilities resistant to attacks from these highly accurate munitions, it makes more sense to turn large facilities into small ones, creating a whole network of small bases so that if one gets hit, the losses are minimal. The huge size of the Indo-Pacific region, the ocean distances, and the small islands only help with this. Well, they make the Air Force strive to make the most out of every piece of concrete they have at their disposal. There's a military term known as Agile combat employment, which is used to describe a way of conducting combat operations. In this case, the Army relies less on large traditional overseas bases and more on launching, recovering, and maintaining aircraft from scattered mobile bases. To put it simply, it's about the U.S. splitting its forces into smaller groups all across the region. The greater number of smaller groups will make the American positions harder to attack because even the most advanced weapons won't be able to hit all of them, and the desire to restore the military base on Tinian Island comes from the fact that it's part of the Agile combat employment system, and also that the number of U.S. overseas air bases has dropped by 65% since the end of the Cold War. As a result, vulnerability has increased along with a constant need to protect all allies' weapon systems, and this has to be done in a way that minimizes ground losses. It seems like Agile combat employment should solve all these problems at once. They'll complicate the enemy's targeting process, create political and operational dilemmas, and help U.S. allies act more flexibly. The solution, by the way, isn't exactly new, but it seems pretty effective given today's realities. Yeah, this is how our modern world looks with its constant aerial shots, global surveillance capabilities, and all kinds of modern tools that you can barely hide from. Add to that super smart, redirectable ballistic missiles, and you'll understand how tough it is to wage war under such conditions. Flexible combat operations will give the military the ability to act even from some unknown little spot with a minimal crew of multifunctional pilots. In recent years, the American military have studied every bit of concrete in the Indo-Pacific region that could be used for future operations. There are actually a lot of such bits, and they're scattered all over the Pacific Ocean. Unfortunately, we can't just name all of them because the details are classified, and they haven't leaked that info yet. But back in August 1941, the U.S. military started developing air bases on islands in the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Australia. These are the airfields on Christmas Island, Canton, Samoa, Fiji, and New Caledonia, plus the Mariana Islands, which include Tinian. And since the U.S. has decided to revive its old airfields as part of the Agile combat employment strategy, some of the bases listed here could definitely become candidates for resurrection. You can also find information online about trials as part of the new strategy on the Palau Islands. The Air Force is planning to upgrade the airfield on the tiny Pacific island of Yap and the Caroline Islands and is ready to spend $400 million on it. And here the connection is quite clear. I'd even call it the legacy of the American island chain strategy. This was a sea-based containment plan first developed by John Foster Dulles in 1951 during the Korean War. It involved surrounding the Soviet Union and China with naval bases in the Western Pacific to project power and restrict access to the sea. The strategy includes 3 island chains. The first is a series of large Pacific archipelagos extending from the East Asian continental coastline. It stretches from the Kamchatka Peninsula in the northeast to the Malay Peninsula in the southwest. The second chain has 2 different interpretations, but the most commonly used version refers to the island chain formed by the Bonin and Volcano Islands of Japan, in addition to the Mariana Islands, primarily of Guam, and the Western Caroline Islands, that is Yap and Palau. This chain stretches to western New Guinea. Since it's located somewhere in the middle of the Western Pacific, it serves as the second strategic defense line for the United States. The third chain is the final part of the strategy. It starts at the Aleutian Islands and heads south through the center of the Pacific towards Oceania, passing through the Hawaiian Islands, American Samoa, and Fiji to reach New Zealand. Yes, when I said the U.S. has plenty of places for potential military bases, I wasn't exaggerating. The most important news in the last few days is that I'm slowly getting back to regular workouts after being sick. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy working out. Typhoons threaten the military. The U.S. Army is a real strong army, but there's one enemy it just can't fight: typhoons. In just 30 hours from October 23rd to 24th, 2018, a tropical storm in the Western Pacific turned into a Category 5 super typhoon. It made a direct hit on the islands of Tinian and Saipan, and as we've already found out, the U.S. is once again increasing its military presence on the first island. They named the super typhoon Yudu, and it became the strongest storm on the planet that year, probably the strongest to ever hit the Mariana Islands. To show you just how serious it was, the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center reported that Yudu had sustained winds of 158 miles per hour. The powerful winds extended out to 87 miles from the epicenter, and tropical storm force winds reached out 240 miles. But that's not all. There were waves, too. The highest ones in the open ocean were estimated to be 52 feet tall. Do you get how hard it would be to do anything in those conditions? And honestly, it's impossible to survive in such chaos of nature. A heavy rainstorm and steady winds claimed the lives of 2 people, injured at least 133, and caused severe damage or destruction to a large part of the island's buildings and essential infrastructure. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command even set up a task force to help citizens, which quickly responded to the damage. It was divided into 2 groups. Some went to Saipan, others to Tinian, where there were over 800 active-duty military personnel and reservists. And yes, if you thought this was a one-time thing, I'm sorry to disappoint you. The typhoon season lasts from July to January, and the Mariana Islands usually get hit by at least one typhoon every year. That's why carrying out military operations on Tinian is really tricky. But the states try their best. Weak defense. What else could stop the U.S. military from setting up bases on the islands? For example, Chinese missiles, which are exactly what these bases are supposed to defend against. These are, of course, theoretical data, but experts are sure that strikes on airfields by China will block the U.S. military aviation's capabilities in the Indo-Pacific region. In a recent report, the main issue was identified as follows. Bases within the first island chain from Indonesia to the northeast of Japan are within range of thousands of Chinese missiles. If weapons designed to destroy or disable runways are used in the conflict, they could shut down airfields in Japan for at least 11 days. Airfields farther out in Guam and the Pacific Islands could be closed for at least 2 days. However, in practice, China could disrupt U.S. operations for a much longer period. In short, the defense doesn't look great. But there's definitely something that can be done about it, right? Experts recommend that the U.S. invest in a large number of inexpensive drones and electronic warfare systems to make it harder for China to plan strikes. Also, these drones can operate on short runways, so their destruction won't be an issue for the country's defense. They also recommend improving runway repair capabilities and enhancing the resilience of bases, as well as forming alliances so friendly countries will be more willing to open up their airfields for U.S. use. It sounds like a typical but effective plan. Expanding the military base. The rivalry between the U.S. and China is actually quite interesting. I mean, it's obviously worrying, but it's fascinating to watch because each side tries to outdo the other in all kinds of ways. This time, the U.S. is rebuilding the Labrum Naval Base on Los Negros Island in Papua New Guinea, all to weaken China's influence and boost its own presence in Oceania. Right now, the Labrum Naval Base is one of 6 sites in Papua New Guinea where U.S. troops have unrestricted access under the Defense Cooperation Agreement signed in 2023. That means this place is really important, so it needs constant upgrades. The U.S. Navy is looking at 3 projects for this base. The first is a regional maritime training center covering 7,500 square feet. The second is boat infrastructure spanning 7,450 square feet. And finally, the third is a major overhaul of a 118-foot worn-out boat pier. The total estimated cost of these projects is between $11 million and $25 million. And if everything goes according to plan, the new base will take maritime security to the next level. This will also make training more effective when critical facilities are involved. On top of that, the U.S. will be working with Australia and Papua New Guinea on the Labrum base upgrade. It's worth mentioning that this isn't the first time the U.S. has rebuilt military infrastructure in this area. For instance, back in 2020, the Labrum base went through renovations. That's when a new power facility, new training and living quarters, and repair facilities for Guardian-class patrol boats were added. When you put together what's been done and what's still to come, you get a cutting-edge naval base provided with everything necessary to perform operations on the water. And with allies like Australia and Papua New Guinea on board, everything should turn out just as intended. Over-the-horizon radar in Palau. A couple more words about Palau. This island nation is in the western Pacific Ocean between the Philippines and Guam and is made up of a group of islands, in other words, an archipelago. The U.S. has the right to develop defense facilities in the country, and Palau has been on board with that, at least since 2017. Palau is also considered key for monitoring airspace and maritime zones over the western Pacific region. However, so far, the U.S. hasn't really taken much advantage of it. And now the time has come. In Palau, according to documents released by the Pentagon, the U.S. military is planning to set up an over-the-horizon radar by 2026. This will boost early warning capabilities in case of an unexpected attack. So what exactly is an over-the-horizon radar? As the name suggests, it's radar, but not a regular one. This tracking device consists of 2 parts, a receiver and a transmitter. It offers a greater range than a line-of-sight radar, and we have to say the Pentagon sees a lot of potential in this new project. No wonder they've allocated $130 million for it. According to the plan, this radar will be a winning choice for reconnaissance thanks to Palau's unique geographic location. But as of now, no work is being done. We'll have to hang tight for a bit before we can see this thing, at least on the web. You owe me a like. See you later.